Can Utah still make the college football playoff in 2024 if they don't win the Big 12? Yogi Roth, the former Pac-12 analyst and now Big 10 analyst, stops by to discuss, talking all things Utah football. He makes quite the Cam Rising prediction and even breaks down Kyle Whittingham's future. All that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and I am ecstatic to be joined on today's Locked On Utes by Yogi Roth. Yogi had a busy week. He was on with Jim Rome, the Move the Sticks podcast with Daniel Jeremiah, but still made time for little old Locked On Utes, something I'm greatly appreciative of. I still remember the very first time a couple years ago when I DM'd Yogi, never expecting a response, but he made time for me, was really gracious when I met him up in the booth one time at one of the Utah football games, and genuinely one of the best people I've met in this business. And also he is one of the best analysts, as I think those of you who listen to him call Utah's games in the Pac-12 network and just break down film will absolutely know. So this was a blast getting the opportunity to talk to Yogi. We dove into all kind of things. We talked about what Utah needs to do to make the college football playoff if they don't win the Big 12, and even if it's just that's possible to preview all things Utah football with a fun game of Finish the Sentence, where Yogi makes a huge prediction on Cam Rising and discusses Kyle Whittingham's future. So make sure you guys stick around till the very end of this one. And without further ado, I give you my conversation with Yogi Roth by asking him if Utah can still make the college football playoff if they fail to win the Big 12 in 2024.
That's a great question. I think to lock it in, locked on, right? Like, yeah. And let me just start too. We'll get into it, but I just want to say thanks, man, for bringing me on. You have always been so gracious. Your community has been phenomenal since I met all of you in like 2005 at the Fiesta Bowl. I kind of knew what Utah was about, I think a little early before it entered the Pac-12. And then for the last 13 years, 14 years, it's been an incredible relationship. So thanks for that, man. And I will be their biggest fan, probably outside of all the listeners to your show. But I think they've got all the capability to go into the playoff. I think they got to win it to lock it. I know that in the SEC and the Big Ten, when you look at the depth and breadth of those leagues, and at least the top of those leagues with the addition of Oklahoma and Texas, with the additions of the 4 schools from the Pac-12, there's going to be a really strong case, I think, in the room, having presented in the room to the CFP over the last 5 or 6 seasons, that they're going to want to get and probably have some cachet to get more than 2 teams, maybe more than 3 teams. Which one gets 4? So I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. I want the season to play out. And then we'll see. I think context is going to be the word that will need to be used all season long when we're debating, teams that are non-Power 4 league champions.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating this year in particular. Yogi, I know just last night I was sitting down and kind of trying to make my own version of the 12-team playoff, and it is interesting how quickly you can kind of fill it up with some of those Big Ten and SEC teams based on projections. And there are so many unknowns in the Big 12, and I think that's why so many people feel good about Utah, because if it's Kansas State, it's like, well, we think Avery Johnson is going to be good, but is he really want to see it more? With Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman has had some ups and downs, and we know what Ollie Gordon can do, but there's still some other aspects there. The amount of starters this Utah team had, Yogi, back in 2021 that helped them win the Pac-12 championship then. And obviously in 22 as well then too. I mean, to Brandt Keithy still being here, Cam Rising around, just what are your overall thoughts on this team? Because I think they're capable of everything that's been thrown around by myself or the national media this year because of those talented players.
Yeah, I'd agree. Well, let me say this too, just to back up around like the amount of teams getting in. I'm a believer of like head to head. So let's just take it's an SC and they don't play Utah obviously this season. But if they lose to, call it, Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and those 3 teams are ranked higher than them, there's going to be a case to say, well, all 3 of their losses are teams that are going to the playoff. Well, I would also argue but they played them. It's different if you hadn't had head-to-heads, if you hadn't had those matchups. So I think in future years, I think we're going to look at November from a scheduling standpoint. At least I would do this if I was helping a conference schedule their games and say, can we make those almost like play-in weekends? to amp the drama even more. We don't have that this year when you look at the layout of the schedule and who plays who in that latter part of the season. When it comes to Utah, I mean, they're playing Central Florida at the end of the season. I mean, who knows what will be at stake in that game? It's going to be the most unique of, I think, of all the new conferences. Like, who would have thought on a holiday weekend Utah is going to play Central Florida? I think like Utah fans will be clamoring for like the made up rivalry with Colorado that weekend instead. Instead, they're going to have to go to Orlando. But they've got all the tools, to your point, of all the starters returning. And I've tried to remind a lot of fans, even going back to 2022, is it was the most explosive offense in the history of Utah football with Cam Rising. Most explosive offense in the history of it. And obviously we know what happened last year. He didn't play. Keithy didn't play. They struggled, doing the things that offense was accustomed to doing under Andy Ludwig. I think they're coming back. And in my time there, I called their spring game. And I've been to Utah practices for the better part of 15 years. I mean, I've called games at Utah when they were in the Mountain West in 2009. I'm calling Utah at Iowa State, right? So I've been around this team. The 90 minutes I was there, man, it was the most efficient and explosive offensive performance I'd ever seen on that practice field. Granted, it was just a snapshot, but that's what it should be. And I told Coach Whittingham that afterwards, because of the experience of a seventh-year senior, because of the anticipation of guys who have been in this offense, because of the offensive line, because of the litany of fifth, sixth, seventh-year players that are on this roster. So they should be marching up and down the field on teams. Like, if it's an execution game, which I think college football is, and you take away ugly plays, you take away unforced errors, explosive plays that you give up on defense, turnovers that you give away, Utah should be the most efficient team, if not one of the most efficient teams in America, based on who the quarterback is and who some of their weapons are as they look inside out of how this thing has been built.
The weapons in particular really stand out, and I'm going to ask you about the wide receivers in a moment. But first, let's talk about Brandt Keithy. I mean, what are you expecting from Brandt this year? He's a guy who had 600-yard seasons back in 2019, 21. Man, in 22, if he would have played the whole year, I think he would have really exceeded 600, especially how he looked against Florida in some of those first games. And I know that opened the door for Dalton to do some things, but I feel like Brandt's got a chance to be special. And I'll even say this, Yogi, this might be the best tight end room in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the in hype season, it's got the conversation starter to talk that way, right? I mean, you look at Landon King, you look at Keithy, you just look at this group. They've got a variety of different body types, right? So they can be in a 2 tight end personnel, and both of those tight ends can line up as receivers. They could be in a 2 tight end personnel, and those can be attached to the offensive line. One can line up as a fullback. Like, you're right. I mean, it's gonna challenge a lot of defensive coordinators in the Big 12 to identify personnel groupings. That's why if Utah can run the football, they're going to have so much success. And for Cameron Rising, like, I'd imagine the QB run game is still going to be part of it. How can it be, right? Just the threat, what that imposes. Hopefully he's not taking on linebackers like he did against SC in the champ game, but it'll still be a threat for defenses. I think from a receiving group standpoint, it's, we've talked in the past. I've talked to our friends like Bill Riley and company in the past, and Spence and the whole crew, and the question is always, what are you worried about? What's the question mark? And it's always been the receiver. Like, I go back to the Darren Carrington era. Prior to that, you think of Britton Covey. Like, it's always been a question mark. And I think it still is this year. It's just not as large, right? When you go back and you look at the season you just referenced, and it was Dalton Kincaid was basically the only answer in the Rose Bowl, and they didn't play. And you were just hoping that Solomon Enos would elevate, Devon Vele would elevate. And they played well, but nobody ever, in my eyes, commanded 2 people on a defense to know where they were at, or special attention to roll of coverage. They just haven't had that. Do they have that now? I think they're closer to. I'm closer to saying yes than ever before, even though we haven't seen it. Right? Dorian Singer looked good in the spring game when we saw him. Sounded like he's got that joy back, that spark back that we saw when he was a walk-on turn scholarship receiver, record-setting receiver, when he was at Arizona under Jedd Fisch. That's amazing. That's amazing for him, and of course for this program. Some of the speed, some of the additions they had via the portal, a healthy Micah Pittman. I think they have weapons. I don't know if anybody is going to command 2 players on a defense other than Brandt Keithy, but that's okay, because if it does, then it's pitch and catch on the outside from Cameron Rising, one of these wideouts. So I think it's a pro style offense. It's based in West Coast principles, meaning there's answers. There's answers everywhere. And I think when you have one of the most efficient quarterbacks in America as the guy leading the charge of being your proverbial point guard, then you just got a shot, man, to really be dynamic and create some explosive plays down the field. And I think they'll have it. I don't know if they'll break that record from 2 years ago numbers-wise, but they should be one of the most explosive offenses in a conference that I don't want to say that they won't have the defense that the Pac-12 had, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation. TBD, we don't know. I don't see an Oregon defense right now.
No, I don't either. I don't. There's a lot of question marks around the Big 12. That's why you can have them in different orders. And Utah has some of their own smaller ones. Like there'll be new faces along the offensive line. We trust they know good recruits. Jim Harding does a good job with that group, but still want to see how it plays out. So that's where these things become interesting. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And they have fantastic last-minute deals, all in price views from your seat. Their lowest price guarantee. Gametime truly takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And when you're talking about Gametime, you're simply talking about the best ticketing app. What I love about Gametime is there aren't those surprise fees. They also have a seat view that gives you a panoramic view from your seat. I recently made a purchase of MLB tickets. I'm going to a Braves game here coming up. I used Gametime because I knew they were going to give me the best deals. It's super easy to navigate and log on. Things like flash exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game were absolutely huge. Also, that all-in pricing, which allows you to see that total upfront, as I mentioned too. And I knew their ticket coverage is the best in the industry and allows me to have complete flexibility planning my trip. Gametime allows me to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So you can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, capital L-O, and college is all capitalized, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I love that you mentioned Cam Rising because that's a perfect segue into the next little game I want to play with you, Yogi.
Okay.
You know, you call games all the time. You know how important chemistry is with your broadcast partner, you know, bailing them out and just, you know, you want to have the good chemistry, be able to finish each other's sentences. And that is what I am looking for you to help me do, because I have a couple of sentences that I'm curious how you would like to fill them in. The first of which involves Bad Moon Rising. This fall, Cam Rising will
find himself in New York City, rightfully so. And I think he's going to leave a legacy at Utah at that position that is similar to the one that Alex Smith left. Yeah, he's not going to be the number one pick in the draft. He's not going to have that type of acumen to him or that type of pedigree, I think. But I think with what he's done and meant to this program is going to stand the test of time. Because as we look at college football in the future, if he had chances to leave and maybe get paid more money and whatever, and he's just thrown down. And, you know, hopefully we never have a pandemic, so nobody has like a 7th season of eligibility. Hopefully no players will never, ever get banned from playing once they transfer, right? You think of Cam, he wrote about it in the book 5-Star QB, the book I co-wrote with a guy named Joey Roberts. He referenced like he didn't get to play his transfer year. JT Daniels did. Same transfer year, just different lawyer, I guess you could argue. So I think he's going to leave a massive legacy, and I anticipate interviewing him in New York City when I'm covering the Heisman.
Well, I mean, me and everyone else absolutely loves to hear that, obviously. And before we continue with the game, I got to talk about that a little bit more. Cam is not a guy, Yogi, who, you know, when you turn on SportsCenter, his highlights aren't going to be all over the place. But he is a proven winner. He's the only quarterback who's won back-to-back conference championships at the Power 5 level, still in college, right? J.J. McCarthy's gone. Some of these other guys who went through Georgia, they're gone as well. What are you most impressed with whenever you break down Cam Rising's game?
I'm trying to think of stages. You know, I think it was I call it the it factor, where, you know, and I define it as when you walk into a room, people feel your presence and you make them better. Being around him at media days or in spring football, I just think his confidence makes everybody kind of believe a little bit more. Everybody stick their chest out a little bit more, right? You see him walk through the tunnel and you're a fan, you yell a little bit louder. You see him go to the line of scrimmage in a 2-minute drill, you feel a little bit more confident. That to me is where I think he's just continued to grow. I think on the field, where I'm most looking forward to watching him evolve is his efficiency and spot throws. Accuracy is one thing when you look at completion percentage, and I get all that. But to me, it's like, it's hitting that front shoulder. It's that anticipation on a seam route right as they're going past the linebackers and in front of the safety. Those are the things that I want to watch him and be like, this is clockwork. Here's an example. If you went to any pro day workout, NFL type of players, or off-season workout with NFL players here in Southern California, they're all over the place. The ball wouldn't hit the ground. Okay, like the ball wouldn't hit the ground. So if I went to practice as they hit training camp, as we're recording this podcast, the ball shouldn't hit the ground. Like, it's a drop, okay, but that's how it should be. That's how it should be. It shouldn't be a bad ball. So I want to see that type of efficiency of like a jugs machine, boom, 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 every single time out.
Yeah, Cam he's special with what he's been able to. And you talk about the it factor. That's something that Kyle Whittingham has mentioned before, what a great leader he is. And he just always seems to come through in the biggest moments, which is the definition of the it factor. So got to feel good now that he's back to this Utah team. And if he does have that type of season in New York, it's going to be a season for the record books for him. And we do so quickly forget it. It's because of, you mentioned, like him not being able to play in 2019. Like, this is really only his third year starting. Got hurt, of course, in 2020. So he's got an opportunity to climb some leaderboards for Utah record books. And I expect him to do so as well, too. But if this Utah team wants to accomplish big things, it will have to be more than Cam. It will also have to be more than Brandt Keithy. So talk about Dorian Singer. Dorian Singer and Andy Ludwig's offense will go off for.
It's interesting. Like, you look at the history, at least in my recency bias. When I think of Utah football, I don't think of like if you think of like SC back in the day when Lane Kiffin was calling plays or the head coach, it was like Marquise Lee had 70 some catches as a freshman, Robert Woods 70 some catches. Like, it was just feeding guys. I don't really see that in Andy Ludwig's system. So I don't want to go on and say he's going to have 65 grabs for 1,200 yards, because in the system it's got a bunch of elements. I break down quarterback play into 3 buckets. Offenses either are pure progression offenses, meaning you're the late great Mike Leach. You could care less about the defense. You go from 1 to 2 to 3, and based on who's open, you throw them the ball. That's the majority of college football. There's progression with an option of you have all that, but if something shows its face over here, you can take that. And then there's PSL, pre-snap look. I get to the line of scrimmage, and I'm going to dissect this defense. I believe when I study this offense, it's got a little bit of everything, but there's a lot of pre-snap look. Like, there's a lot of what Cameron Rising, he's got to do with the line of scrimmage a little bit. Like, he's got to understand what's going on. What does that do? That sometimes can manipulate certain guys to get open. So that would benefit a Dorian Singer at times. But it also, you're taking what the defense immediately gives you because you're reading a defense and the ball's out. West Coast offense, when Bill Walsh kind of created, and you know this, it was an extension of the run game. Right? That's why Roger Craig had so many touches, and Ricky Waters and all those catches that the Niner greats had back in the days, because they could catch it out of the backfield, right? They can catch a little angle route, a little swing route. That's how they utilize the run game to a degree. And I think this is an offense that's going to want to run the football. So I say all that to answer. I think I'll have over 50 grabs. And I think he'll be tipping the scale. We're talking just regular season. We just go 12 games. Yeah, I'd say right around 50 grabs. I'd say like 750, 800 yards. But if they take a run, Big 12 title game, first round game, if they lose and or if they have a bye, like he could be playing in a 1,000-yard season.
Yeah, especially like you mentioned too, if the attention's at Brandt Keithy and he gets back to that Arizona level receiver that he's more than capable of becoming once again, he could put up even bigger numbers in the regular season. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Just like I'm really excited for this Utah defense. How can you not be a Morgan Scalley-led Utah defense? So I want to know, Yogi, in 2024, the Utah defense will
be the number 1 defense in the Big 12. And I don't think that's a stretch. I mean, when you look at the numbers, at least Kyle Whittingham references pretty regularly, right? The efficiency of a defense, the red zone capability of a defense. You look at the aggressive nature of Morgan Scalley in this defense. I look at this linebacker core. There's 3 guys that are just absolute studs. I'm a big fan of some of the new faces on the edges. I think Junior Tafuna is an All-American. He's a guy who could have gone to the NFL, just became a father. No one would have begrudged him if he didn't. And he said, no, unfinished business, I'm staying. Secondary, looking forward to watching it, right? Some new faces there, some transfers there. But you know what they're going to do, and they're not going to change. They're going to play in your face, physical. They're going to try to disrupt the timing. They're going to bring pressures. I expect this team to have the season that we saw. I think it was in 18. It was 18 the year they lost to Oregon in the title game? 19. Yeah. I walked on that practice field and I said, this is the best defense I've seen since I was coaching at USC and when everybody went to the NFL. Yeah. It was probably the best defense I saw in the Pac-12 era, top to bottom. I think they'll have a shot to be that type of defense. They might not be as high end. I don't know if Jalen Johnson's on this team, Julian Blackman, like that's hard. Like you got to prove it to be Bradley and I, but I'm bullish on them, man. I really think this defense is going to be able to move around, fly around. And, them at K-State, Oklahoma State, like you can argue, Baylor has usually played pretty good defense, but I think Utah, they're not going to have to flinch much in this new conference.
I totally agree. And I want to know, you mentioned several names right there, but I am curious who you think, or I'll ask it in the context I'm playing this game in, the breakout player for Utah football in 2024 will be?
It's hard. It's weird to say this, but I'm going to say Lander Barton because I feel like he doesn't get the play nationally that he should get.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think he was on any of the Big 12 preseason lists.
He was not.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a game wrecker. I say that because Utah hasn't had a guy like him, right? I have this graphic in front of me of like linebacker duos. I talked about it in the spring game. I love just like the duos. It's always kind of, they've been fun to track at Utah over the course of my time calling their games. They got a trio this year. And if you look at Lander, he can play the edge. He can drop into coverage. He can come off the edge. He can play inside in the two linebacker system that they've played regularly. I think he'll be a first team, all Big 12 player and a chance to make a lot of noise nationally.
Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. You can keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Once again, head over to ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. I think in the NFL draft as well. I'll even add on top of that. I think he's got a chance to do some special things in his future for sure. Yogi, I actually called one of his games back in high school, and he made a play. He tipped an interception to himself, and he stiff-armed the quarterback on his way into the end zone. And that was the year, of course, Jim Harbaugh flew out to see him in the khakis and everything. And now that he's up at Utah, was a part of a Pac-12 championship his first year, played a great game against USC, and I think he has a chance to have a special season and hopefully hear his name called in the 2025 NFL draft. Speaking of 2025, in 2025, Yogi Roth, Kyle Whittingham will be?
This is a hard question because I know if I say like, broadcasting, like your audience might be like, whoa, what do you know? I don't know. I think and I've interviewed him at the Rose Bowl post game both times. And there was a world going into that game that I thought this was going to be it for him. Especially when you look at the season where they had lost two players. That was such a challenging year for them. But there's something about him where he gets revitalized. There's something about him. I think like Pete Carroll to me. I mean, it was a joke for like a decade, and I stopped listening to him because he would tell me so regularly that like he was going to retire after the season. And he told me that for the first time in like 2005. We were trying to win our third straight national championship. And like he coached for another 20 some years, or whatever it's been, 22, 23 years. So I don't know, man. I don't think he's going to be on it for long, but I do think there's something, I don't know, this isn't my gut, but to win so many different divisions and conferences, I think it means a lot to him. I think that the way he has adapted radically to the ever-changing landscape of college football has proved that like he's not burnt out by this thing. he's not burned out by NIL or burnt out by the transfer portal. We've all read the comments that Nick Saban said when he left Alabama. So I think he wants to win it. Like, what do I see? I see him winning a championship and riding off in his Harley. Is that a Big 12 championship? Is that a playoff game? Is that a national championship? Like, I just think he's so close to the pinnacle that, I mean, I don't know. I could see it after this year with him and Cam and, Andy, like this trio that have been together for so long. And I could also see them saying, all right, run it on back. We got, Sam Heward competing against these other, what's his name?
Isaac Wilson.
Yeah, Isaac Wilson and company. Like, I could see him being re-energized by that too. So I don't know, bro. Either way, like, I hope I'm still talking to him. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, you mentioned broadcasting, so I want to know before I ask you my final sentence question. Do you think he would make a good broadcaster?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think he's really thoughtful. I think that's the number one thing. I think we're all kind of over the era of screaming and yelling pretty regularly, and I think when it comes to sport, you want to be thoughtful. I could see him being in studio. He's also not been afraid to give his opinion. He just came on my podcast this week, and we did an interview with him that we transcribed and put out as an article, and he talked about where he thinks the game is going. I also think that he's one of the guardians of the game, and I think there's few coaches that are like that. I think he's really trying to protect it. So I could see him being on air. I could see him being a part of hopefully some sort of administration overseeing college football. I could see him being on the CFP and just kind of dropping in and hanging out through the season and being busy. And I could see him doing nothing and just cruising on out of here and watching Morgan Scalley from afar and tuning into games to watch his Utes play. He's got that type of ability. So I don't know. I don't know where he would shake out.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. And I do like that you mentioned that you had the chance to talk to him, because I want to ask you that in one moment. But this might be the quickest sentence you finish yet, because I think I know we're going to land on it. The 2024 Big 12 champions will be?
Your Utes.
That's what I love to hear. That's where I was hoping you were going, and that's what I had a feeling. I think for all the reasons we've talked about, I think it makes more than enough sense, and we've more than given our reasons why we think this team can be so special this season. And one of the chief reasons, obviously, Yogi, is Kyle Whittingham. And also, Mark Harlan is part of that too, the success that Utah Athletics has had. You had an opportunity to sit down with both of them on your podcast, the Y Option. What would people expect, and why should they go check that out?
Well, really, when the Pac-12, splintered last August 4th, I spent the whole season saying, okay, I got to find a new job, but let's also ask, like, how are all these schools going to share their stories? Like, you go to the Big 12, there's no Big 12 network, right? Which is hopefully good for your show, because fans of Utah and or their opponents are going to come to you guys to learn some insight on who this team is as they prepare for that potential game and potential outcome. I felt the same way. I was like, all right, where's Cal and Stanford fans going to go? The Big 10 has 18 teams. Like, where are these schools going to share, the beautiful stories or the competitive stories or the news that they have? And I started thinking, well, they all need options. I started thinking about the West Coast and college football. And I thought, what's the greatest play in the West Coast? Well, it's right here. It's a Y option. It's your tight end. It's Dalton Kincaid on an option route. I thought of myself. I was seeking my next option. And then my name, of course, is Yogi. So myself and Jim Thornby, longtime producer, one of the most talented guys ever been around, I started calling him every week in the season. I'm like, talk to the people at Utah, talk to people at Arizona, talk to some fans in the stands at SC. I think this thing might have legs. So we brainstormed on it and netted out in really towards the end of the season, right around the playoff. We're like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So as a conference kind of changed shape, I believe there's still a community on the West Coast that loves college football. And hopefully, and you would be able to answer this accurately or not, but hopefully all the fans that I've been able to connect with over the course of not 20 years in this league, in the Pac-10 or the Pac-12, like they've come to trust me, at least trust my voice and the thoughtfulness around it when it comes to college football. So it's all right, let's create a show that's about college football through the lens of the West Coast. See what happens, because all too often these stories are coming from the Northeast or the Midwest and, of course, the SEC. I'm like, man, screw that. Like, why don't they come from us? I know I can get guests on. So we got on Kyle. We have Brent and Brandon coming on next week. We talked to Dylan Gabriel and Miller Moss, and we'll keep doing that all season long. So I think for those that are looking for a home that's thoughtful, around college football, and especially with a lens of the West Coast. And I include Utah and Colorado and all those teams in that, much like I include Alabama and Michigan. Like, I'm going to tell you, what do we think about Alabama and Michigan? What's the West Coast think? Because I think that when you go to those communities, they think so highly of themselves, like they're untouchable to a degree. It's not that way out here. Like, that's not how they're viewed. It's a different deal. And maybe that's because there's more to do. You can go snowboarding in Salt Lake, or you can go surfing here in LA. But that's just different. And I wanted to offer that perspective. So we launched that in mid-July. We're almost a month in, and it's been a blast, man. So I appreciate all the support. The Utah fans have just been, incredible. Because with that, I also announced that I'm not going to be calling games on ESPN or at Fox, which is covering, Utah football now for the next couple of years. So this is a place where I can stay connected to those fans.
Well, it's something we're excited to check out. And this is Locked On Utes, but I will just say, because you mentioned Miller Moss, there was just some things around USC in particular that have come from, like you kind of said, the more East Coast media that I think are pretty crazy. That's kind of been stated. So I think it's good that there is that West Coast kind of pushback like that. And I really hope that Miller has a monster year. And I know here at Utah, we had our fun beating USC a couple times, but I think some of the things that get said about Lincoln Riley are a little crazy for the success he's had. So I think a lot of people are going to enjoy you being able to shed light on that and so many other stories. Yogi, it was so great having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time. Make sure you guys check out the Y Option podcast, as well as check out Yogi on the Big Ten Network too. It should be a fantastic season, Yogi. And once again, just appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Anytime, bro. Appreciate it. Go Utes.
Go Utes. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll be back with you for more Utah content very soon.